We have a tradition as Africans. Any Africans in the house?
Yes, sir.
Three Africans. Three Africans. Everybody denied that, but not me, boy. Oh, we are called Africans. We look like Boo Boo right now. We're Africans, man. We're taught that this civilization comes out of a Roman civilization. And we went to school and we learned our lessons well. And we recorded that as reality. We never argued with it. It was like that we heard about Julius Caesar and all them guys then. So yeah, they used to have some hot steam bath. And we heard about the, you know, there was a bit of decadence and some grapes. People that eat grape like that and things. Some of us have seen Caligula. Make no mention, you know, and we accepted that. But then when you look into the depth of the Roman view, the Romans said that they got their stuff from the Greeks. Their civilization come from the Greeks. Then study what the Greeks say. They got their stuff from the Egyptian. Where's Egypt? Where's Egypt? Boy, you're shy.
If we, as people of African descent, were to accept as truth the history that appears in the history books, we would have to believe that world civilization had a white face and that our ancestors contributed nothing to the development of the world. This Eurocentric view is being challenged by a growing number of black people in Britain through Afrocentrism, a set of ideas that looks at our contribution to world civilization. We are educating ourselves to reclaim our history and culture.
I run a number of courses myself in Black Studies. I have done so for the past 5 years. It's the 5th year, in fact, and it has grown in demand and in numbers over the years. The courses I run, for instance, focus on 7 core areas, which includes history, which includes science, religion, politics, sociology, psychology, and philosophy. And what we seek to do is look what is the contribution, historically and currently, of those of African descent in these areas. The records about ancient African history has been, by and large, consistent up until last century. Last century, the records began to be tampered with. The reason why the records are tampered with can be found in attempting to justify slavery.
There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white. No ingenious manufacturers amongst them, no arts, no sciences.
When we attempt to find an explanation for the justification of slavery, what becomes necessary is we reduce those people to animals. They've made no contribution to history, and therefore they are not really worth anything but to buy and sell them.
Africa is without a history. In that savage country, we find no vestige of the past, no ancient architecture, neither sculpture nor even one chiseled stone to prove that the Negro savage of this day is inferior to a remote ancestor. We must therefore conclude that the races of man which now inhabit this region are unchanged from the original prehistoric inhabitants.
Not only was the African the earliest type of humanity, thus the earliest humans, as scientists would inform us, but that the earliest ideas and institutions was fashioned by these earliest human beings. When we speak of the earliest ideas and institutions, we're speaking of issues such as religion, such as science, technology, and so on. So that the notion of civilization is at stake.
Many of us are still unaware of the African contribution to world development, both in the ancient and more recent past.
know that the first person to reach the North Pole was a black man? I'm just saying that because, you know, we're frightened of the cold. A brother called Matthew Ensign. The first man to reach the North Pole. You talk about where you get so cold you can block off a finger like an icicle. Sure. Look at that was a black man. A brother like Lewis Howard Latimer. Yes, that brother? Yes, if I asked you who causes it today that we got light bulbs and stuff, you'd say Edison. Edison. Well, the bulbs that Edison made, you turn them on and them go poof. I'm telling you the truth. Edison's bulbs was like a thing where you turn on the switch and you oh, got it gone again. Lewis Latimer made this bulb that we have today. So understand that all of this is ours. The roots of what we have to do today, brothers and sisters, is we have to learn self-love. All the people who are successful on this planet are unified. We're the only ones who are all over the place, doing our own thing, you know. Sure, boy, you know. Can't bother with black people, man, I'm too full. That's kind of attitude, beloved. Grave talk. I'm saying to you, brothers and sisters, we've got to look into this. Because we've been educated by a system that didn't really have us in mind or have our welfare in mind.
Although Rosalind Abanishola's parents were Nigerian, she was never taught about her African heritage at home or at school. The new national curriculum says it aims to give all pupils an awareness of their past, but she's worried that it includes hardly any aspects of African history.
To me, if it's not being done in the school, we have to find ways and means of educating children. If you believe it's important, they have to, you know, they have to be taught their history. Whichever means or however possible it is to do it, then you have to do it.
Yeah, he encouraged black people to feel proud of their African history and return to Africa to find their true dignity and honour.
I don't get this.
Mummy,
Yeah,
just N-O-O-R spell something. Oh, just N-O. I won't know how important that is to my children until they get older, until they grow up. I just think I'm going to do as much as I can now and tell them as much as they need to know now. So at least, you know, they won't have to go through what I went through. I remember going to school and, you know, you just wanted to be anything but African. It was just that, you know, you didn't, anything but, I remember because my surname is Abanishola, and that is Nigeria, you can't get away from that. I remember a girl in my school said to me, oh, it sounds Spanish, so I was so happy because, if it, you know, as long as it didn't sound African, I was okay. And I found that I didn't associate myself with, you know, black people. I always find that I was always kind of, I always make sure I had, you know, white friends. I didn't kind of associate myself with, you know, with black people because I really believed I wasn't black. It shouldn't be that you reach 16 or 18 before you start to, you know, have an African awareness of yourself. You shouldn't have to be 16 before you realise that. I mean, you should know growing up. They need to be taught when they're young. I mean, I don't see why my children have to go through school being denied, you know, their true identity and not taking on what people have told them about themselves. Because if people say that you were monkeys or you were slaves, you have to just sit and believe that when there's a whole, you know, whole heap about yourself that you don't know. You know, I went to Nigeria when I was 10 years old, and even though I didn't want to go because I thought, oh no, mud huts, you know, I didn't, because what I was taught at school, I really, even though my dad was saying to me, no, there are houses, because the school told me there was mud huts in Africa, that's all we was taught. I believe that's where we were going to go and live in. And when we went and I saw a fridge and, you know, a house, I was so happy. But I mean, I let the teacher tell me, you know, what Nigeria was like. Even though my dad was telling me, no, it's not true, I still kind of went with that, you know, negative view. I cannot wait for the national curriculum to decide that, you know, it's time for children now to learn African history. It might never come. It might not even come in my children's lifetime. And you can look at the map, all right. For generations before us, I think for some it's too late. They've already set in their ideas. But I think, you know, you can only start with your children, and in turn, hopefully they will pass that on to their children.
There is so much to learn, but we have to get started today. Because we got no right, you and I today, to insult our ancestors and go backwards. Do you know that freedom is not something that can be legislated? Somebody can write out freedom on a piece of paper. Do you know that no people ever got any kind of freedom without taking it? And I'm not talking about going out tomorrow with no gun or no machete. I'm just talking about coming into the knowledge of self, which gives you a foundation which is unshakable in terms of your forward development and forward growth. And when we stand up and talk like this, white people get scared. See? Because we're standing up, we're getting wise, and they get frightened of that, you know, man, I'm telling you, frightened, start shake and scratch up themselves. And they want to put a stop to it.
They're not really talking about culture at all. They're talking about some kind of misfortune that has to be overcome. I agree that the misfortune is widespread and that it has to be overcome and that something must be done, but you can't achieve this by inventing history.
Recently, there have been a number of television programs asking white intellectuals about the impact of Afrocentrism in America. These haven't given a balanced view. We asked African-American scholar Hunter Adams and Femi Biko to review some of these programs.
For better or for worse, America is an extension of Europe. Even the black Americans, they've lived here for 3 centuries. I mean, their culture is a part of the American culture. The whole effort to try to identify black Americans with Africa is extremely artificial.
Stop that.
You know,
Stop that right there. That's absurd. That's absurd. The issue for black Americans is, at least in Schlesinger's view, is that you don't have the right to decide who you are, that it is my prerogative to define who you are, who you can be, what your history constitutes.
He said America is an extension of Europe, and thus African Americans are extensions of Europeans. That's his logic.
The point is that not every lie, not every illusion, not every distortion of history that can be done in the interests of self-esteem and personal self-identification can be justified on those grounds. You have to take a very close look at yourself and your objective, and the objective social conditions in which you live, and try perhaps and recapture a little bit of the old American existentialism, which placed more of the onus for one's fate on one's own actions.
Robert Hughes is displeased about the whole Afrocentric issue, which very much is a means of exercising self-autonomy, collective self-determination. He says here one is responsible for one's action. And as with the African community, the black community, there is an attempt here to begin to research into one's heritage and to begin to exercise knowledge of that heritage, which is displeasing to him on the one hand. On the other hand, one is responsible for one's action.
Arthur Schlesinger and people like him, comments will have disastrous effects for any type of equity, cultural equity in education in Britain and other European countries, because they're only getting one perspective.
You see, education is the key. When you are educated, when you have the knowledge, and I'm saying to you, I'm so glad that I never went through this school system. You know, I don't know how it happened, you know, but in my whole life, I've had about 3 years of education from the system, and I'm so grateful. I'm not suggesting to the youth that they mustn't get an education. That's not an excuse for you to go skybar from school, you know what I mean? So the little girl, oh yeah, really? You know? That, you know what I'm saying? But because I wasn't totally crushed by that, because it crushes you.
18 years ago in Liverpool, the Charles Wotton Centre was set up to provide education for young black adults who had been failed by the mainstream education system. The centre has a unique curriculum, placing a strong emphasis on the inclusion of black history and experience in what is taught.
We offer a number of courses in computing skills, and so forth. And we offer a course in black history so that we can relate to our own experience and our own needs. And progressing from the black history course, we now hope to develop a black studies A-level. You know, we're not a comma in someone else's history. We as black people have our own history, our own experience, which is relevant to our needs. And black studies helps to address that situation.
We live in Britain, but Britain is a multicultural society. The existing history syllabus is only looking at history from one perspective. And if it is a multicultural society, it should be looking at history from all perspectives, especially from black perspective. And that's why the Charles Hutton Center will continue to be important.
If you're going to oppress someone, you wipe the history away, you know, and that's what they've done to Africa, wiped its history. You understand? Well, you know, tried to wipe it from the minds of African people, you know, all around.
I'm 28 years old, left school at 16 with no qualifications. Decided to go to the Charles Hutton Center. So education to me is just like a key, you know, and a way forward. My parents come from the West Indies, come from Jamaica, and I was born here in Liverpool, living in Liverpool 8 now. Didn't really enjoy school, felt as if like alienated by what I was taught, no real positiveness about myself and my race. No teachings about African civilization or anything like that, or you know, any major contribution to the world. It made you feel empty, you know, as a black youth growing up in Liverpool, you felt empty.
Region, who laid down the foundations for culture and civilization for the world. We ask those ancestors to be with us and strengthen us and give us a Pan-African vision for the future. In the name of those African ancestors who traveled down that cultural highway of the Nile, 4,000 miles, and laid the foundations of science and religion and architecture and philosophy in Ethiopia and in Kush and in Egypt itself, and became the fountainhead of knowledge.
Being born here, it's like you had no place of origin. You felt, you know, like an outcast kind of thing. So finding like your African roots, you could relate and feel like somebody. Like if you was an orphan and then you found your mother and father, all of a sudden, you know, you feel complete.
In the name of those Africans who spread throughout Africa, laying the culture and foundation for other great African achievements, the stone cities of Zimbabwe, the great cities along East Africa, the great kingdoms of the west coast of Africa, among the Akan and the Yoruba and the Bak-Congo, the Islamic city-states and great empires of the Sudan, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. We ask these African ancestors to be with us, strengthen us, and help us build a meaningful future for ourselves and our family and posterity.
Reclaiming African history will affect all history. The foundation of European civilization, for example, has been distorted to deny its black African roots in Nubia and Egypt.
The ethnicity of the question of the Egyptians, which is a major issue in the Afrocentric movement, that the ancient Egyptians were Africans, i.e. black, it's one that sends a lot of scholars into disarray.
You can't invent the history of blacks in
the
Egypt.
Egyptians were neither black nor woolly-haired,
They
and the
would say
formation of
maybe
their
they were
head
brown
once
or
mixed,
mixed,
or
but they
pictures does
refused
not mean
to
they were
believe
black-skinned.
they were black. Evidently
Black depicted
a race
fertility.
distinct from the Negroid and other black tribes.
They would rather like to see the ancient Egyptian as something that's categorized as part of the Mediterranean race or part of the Semitic, Hamitic, Near Eastern cultures, a whole series of terms that's used to avoid this issue. Black scholars in the field, they're able to quote from people who, for example, lived around the same period, were contemporaneous with the ancient Egyptians. They were to quote from the likes of Herodotus, who wrote that the Egyptians were of black skin and woolly hair. They were to quote from someone like Aristotle, who was able to state, after having studied in Egypt also, an eyewitness, that the Egyptians were too black. They were able to quote from the likes of Strabo, Plutarch, Pliny, and so on, a group of Roman and Greek scholars who studied in Egypt and said so. However, them having studied in Egypt and saying so is still found objectionable by some scholars, who would rather say, well, they said they studied in Egypt, but we doubt it if they did. They said the Egyptians were black people, but we doubt if they are. So the people who lived with the Egyptians are able to give us eyewitness accounts. The people who did not are able to refute or deny what they've said.
Saying 5,000 years ago, there was a brother born called Imhotep. People know him. I mean, I'm saying, brothers and sisters, just imagine. You stand up and you say 5,000 years ago, a brother called Imhotep was born, and people say, I'm saying, just imagine the impact of that brother. 5,000 years after he's gone, people still feel that. Can you imagine what kind of brother that was? Powerful, man. This brother was the prime minister under an emperor or a king called Zosa in Egypt. At a time when we had, I'm saying 5,000 years ago, we had an upper house and a lower house. So you got to look at the parliament system here. The White House and the Red House, that's what they were called. This brother was what we call a multi-genius. This brother was an astronomer, surgeon, mathematician. I mean, I could go on. Because then you start looking at John Major's qualifications. See? A man who failed a certain exam at school. That's what I'm saying, you see? Because in 5,000 years' time, John Major, who? That's what I'm saying. So look at that. Imhotep. Brother was the one who designed the first step pyramid, which led to the great pyramids of Gaza being built. Brother was a serious brother. And he was into astronomy. Built the first, one of the first, I don't say the first, because if you knew how far we go back, then you'd be freaked out. I ain't talking about no thousands of years. But built one of the first hospitals known to the planet, called the Temple of Imhotep. Like Greeks and Persians used to go to Egypt to have cataract operations performed on their eyes. Brain surgery. You want to come up, Auntie?
The black community, having come in touch with this body of information, they've become very interested in their heritage, starting from the Nubian through to the Egyptian, through to the current Kushites, Ghana, Mali civilization, through to the present period. They're able to understand that missing part of their history. You know, this picture that's projected that they've contributed very little to history other than as slaves. That whole way, that whole manner by which African history is signposted is now being rejected.
As we begin to understand that there are other ways of viewing or understanding history, our quest for knowledge grows. Videos, audio cassettes and books from outside the white broadcasting and publishing worlds are all in great demand.
Good evening, you're listening to Black London on 1458 AM. My name is Cheryl Sims and this evening's guest is Dr. Curtis Alexander. Why are you visiting the UK at the moment?
What we are doing is bringing books to the citizens of the UK who are interested in books on the African heritage. We were Africans, not by choice, but we were born African. And wherever we find ourselves on this planet, we are still Africans. So people are very closely knitted together. And we found a great interest in what we are doing in America.
in terms of literature. And this is one of the reasons we're here, because people here in the UK are interested, and we are interested in what people are writing here in the UK. So we have a number of publishers from the UK who are participating. We have reprinted materials that you can only find in the British Library on the experience of Africans. Now, the term Afrocentric is a new term in relation to talking about what has existed for thousands of years. So we are talking about recapturing the history of African people, not from the jungle and from the Tarzan vantage point, but from the antiquities of Nubia, Ethiopia, and ancient Egypt that are still in existence today and carved in stone. So this is what we are projecting, not any new version of an old history, but a reclamation and a correction of history that has been distorted and bastardized.
Malcolm X said, taken from the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, history is best qualified to reward our research. Marcus Messiah Garvey said, a people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. These are really profound things. And if we understand what that means, beloved, then we will understand that we've got some work to do. See? We have to know the past in order to know what's really happening today and in order to gear ourselves for the future.
This issue of a fabricated past and dishonest claims is what needs to be resolved. We cannot continue to build a future on shaky foundations. Where the rut is to be found in that foundation, it's only a matter of time before the entire structure collapses.
Afrocentrism recognizes the differences within the African communities, but focuses on what we have in common. It enables us to determine our identities, what constitutes our past and what our future can be. Afrocentrism may focus on people of African descent, but its impact will affect every member of society.
Do you know that there is nobody, no set of people today on this planet who are trying to be other than what they are? The only people on the planet today who are trying to integrate into that which they are not, black people. You can't integrate unless you have a knowledge of self. You can't join onto something else which is purporting to be superior to you, and you're gonna, what are we gonna do? So one day we're gonna be in number 10. Brothers and sisters, they won't even let a Welshman in there.
If you would like more information on Afrocentrism, please write with a stamped addressed envelope to Open Space, BBC Television, Wood Lane, London W12 7RJ.
This is not really Leo's complete show. This is just, I'm doing this for the BBC, okay? And they've got their stuff already. Them could turn off camera and leave now, and probably some of them want to go anyway. So they come on vexing them. But what? I didn't know they were going to say things like that. Bloody hell, I mean, what the hell? This is England, and it bloody hell. But you know, oh man, I tell you, you know. I tell you the truth, I'm saying, beloved, there's no malice, you know. It's no malice, it's just truth, you know. We got to get wide, we got to get real to the truth and start enjoying truth, because truth is a beautiful thing, man.